Good afternoon, everybody. It's David Schlotthauer here, and welcome back to another detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion for Monday, July 7th, 2025. In this update, we are going to be looking at the main development region on when that basin will finally wake up with tropical activity and stronger tropical waves as we go into the latter part of July. We're also going to be looking at the Caribbean, the Gulf, and the Western Atlantic as sea surface temperatures here continue to warm significantly as the trade winds really reduce. Now, before I do get started, if you are new to the channel and you do like these detailed tropical weather outlook and discussions on a daily basis, please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell notification icon, hit the like button, and share this video with their family and friends on social media. And of course, please leave a comment in the section below this video. So with that all being said, let's take a look at our latest GOES 19 True Color Visible Satellite Imagery provided by Dr. Levi Cowan at tropicaltidbits.com. There's a link in the description below this video. And as we could see the satellite imagery clearly, there is a lot of dry air and it is very, very stable out there in the Atlantic. So stable that we are even seeing stratus filtrating all the way down into the deep tropics here. You can see a nice good push of that drier air coming off of Africa. There's even some Saharan dust associated with that. And this is going to be moving all the way across the Caribbean, also across the rest of the main development region, keeping things from developing for the foreseeable future. However, we do have some increasing tropical wave activity, though, in the deep tropics here coming off of Africa. You can see some deep convection there, an indication that we are starting to see a more active West African monsoon taking place here. And it's not usually until we get into the latter part of July into early August when that monsoonal pattern really gets going. When you take a look here at the Gulf, though, more sunshine, lesser thunderstorms after a deluge of lots of rain and thunderstorms down here, part of what is now left with Chantal, now moving across southern New Jersey. This has allowed a lot of sea surface temperature cooling, but now that we have a lot of sunshine, the trade winds out here are going to be very, very light across the entire Gulf, including eventually in the Caribbean and the southwestern Atlantic. So we are going to see another resurgence of very warm sea surface temperatures over the next few weeks, probably through the rest of July into early August. And that's going to set the tone of how warm will we get in time before the Atlantic hurricane season really wakes up more quickly. Now we can clearly see how much dust and dry air there is actually out there in the deep tropics of the Atlantic, even in the subtropics. All of this orange and red denotes a lot of dry Saharan air. This is really warm, really dry, and it's very stable, and it caps the atmosphere, so we're not able to get thunderstorms, any convergence along the intertropical convergence zone to otherwise spawn tropical waves and then eventually maybe into tropical depressions or storms. So all of this orange and red indicates a lot of dry, dusty Saharan air. Especially over here, man, there is some bright pink colors indicating there's a lot of concentration of aerosols and drier air that is currently moving off of Africa. Not much in the Caribbean for right now, but that is soon to change over the next week or two. Another product that I have introduced in my recent videos is the current 850 millibar vorticity plot. This is basically plotting on how much spin we have in the atmosphere, cyclonically speaking. And what we have here is what is left with Chantal, that red dot on your screen in the southern portion there of New Jersey, over Maryland, over Delaware. Yeah, bringing some disturbing weather in that area. We have another little area here of spin that the models have backed off on, so we don't see any development with that for right now, but that might sneak its way into the Gulf eventually and might develop there. We'll have to see on how models handle that. But otherwise, out here in the deep tropics, there is nothing alarming coming up at all over the next couple of weeks, all thanks to what? Lots of dry, dusty Saharan air coming off of Africa. And some of you have been probably asking in my recent videos, when is this dust actually going to back off? It typically doesn't wane away until very late July into early August, even sometimes even into mid-August. we could see some of these Saharan dust outbreaks shape up. And so it's not uncommon to see this time of the year. So please hold on to your horses because right now this is climatology and we're supposed to not really see a whole lot of tropical activity this time of the year in early July. So seeing all this dust is quite typical. Another thing, though, that I will agree with you all on is how strong the deep layer vertical wind shear has been thus far in the deep tropics, especially in the Caribbean, where we have deep layer vertical wind shear here greater than 50 to 60 knots yet again. This has been a thing since literally early May, since we have had a lot of deep layer vertical wind shear, and that's all the red here. This red strip denotes very unfavorable upper level winds in the atmosphere, and this again is deep layer vertical wind shear, but all this green down here in the deep tropics denotes very light vertical wind shear, generally under 5 to 10 knots. So if we had a very moist, unstable atmosphere out here in the deep tropics coming off of Africa, we had these tropical waves. This would be a pretty good environment for which these tropical waves can thrive off of with very light upper level winds and light vertical wind shear. So with that in mind, here's a look at the latest 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida. And as we can see here, this is what is left with Chantal, still bringing some disturbing weather, some heavy rainfall, some gusty winds. Winds now at 30 miles an hour, minimum central pressure at 1,009 millibars, and it is moving to the northeast at 17 miles an hour. So this is moving pretty quickly, and it is going to be moving offshore later on tonight into tomorrow, but it's not going to be able to develop because of the background state. Lots of southwesterly flow aloft. This thing is not going to redevelop at all once it moves back offshore. And instead, it's probably going to be more of an extratropical cyclone as it gets up here into the very high latitudes. Now, when we take a look here at our latest GFS model for this afternoon on your Monday, July 7th, 2025, we can see a nice big sprawling ridge of high pressure across the Azores, across Bermuda in the subtropical region of the Atlantic. And this is pretty typical for early July. Don't let your guard down on this pattern. Please do not. There's been some Twitter feed about this that, oh, this ridge is way stronger than it should be. And I do agree with you on that one. It has been stronger than it should be, but doesn't always mean it's going to stay that way. And we really have to be tropical weather aware, especially as we go into August and September, because I showed you in my live stream how backloaded this season might end up being. We may not see any activity through the rest of July or even into much of August, but that last day of August, we could see a system spurt up into September, and it could end very late as well. There's always a delay to things, all right? And I believe our backloaded seasons are going to become more common in a climate that we're entering in. And so putting this into motion, this is the 3-plot system of the GFS model, and we can see here that there is what is left with Chantal over the next 30 days. Nothing too substantial with that, other than it's going to bring in some inclement weather up here across the UK, as well as maybe Portugal, as well as Spain, but otherwise not a big deal out of that system. But down here, too stable and dry for any tropical formation anytime soon over the next 3 days. And as we go forward here on the GFS model over out to 10 days. Now, there's been some talk as we zoom in here that another system or another homegrown system very close to home here could develop in the next 10 days. Now, my thoughts on that are there's a mixed signal. The GFS has not been too consistent on this developing at all in the Northern Gulf, okay? And the fact that it retrogrades and it parallels the coast makes this a lot more uncertain. And so there's been some Twitter feed that, oh, there has been an uptrend on this system. I'm not seeing that quite yet. And so we're just going to have to watch for future model runs of the GFS to see if that stays consistent. If we look at the European model, the 0Z run, this is actually, let's look at the fast forecast here. This is the 12Z output. And we can see here that the European model, even out to 10 days, barely has a footprint, a very weak signature there across the northwestern portion there, or the northeastern Gulf, okay, and off the Florida coast as well as Georgia. Okay, so this is pretty far out, and so there's a lot of room of variability on that type of tropical system that tries to develop. We can't take our eyes off these things. It is worth watching, but I am not too concerned yet. I don't see that becoming a major hurricane by any means, but it's something to kind of keep an eye on for if we're not looking at the MDR out here. Now, looking at the Canadian model, we can see here, actually, let's go and zoom out here, the rest of the tropics, of course. You can see the European model out here too. There's a nice, good tropical wave. Here comes another tropical wave off of Africa, but the problem here is it is too darn dry, it is too darn stable, and the MJO is not very active, and so we're seeing a lot of sinking motion out here in the Atlantic and Central America. Even over Central Africa, there's a lot of subsidence happening. And so that air sinks, it warms, and it dries. And the ending result is we get these tropical waves that are like skeletons. They're not coming alive. They're just kind of dead and dry. And other than it brings some disturbance of weather over the Windward Islands down here in Venezuela, there's just nothing to spark these at all. And that's going to continue right now. It looks like going into the middle of July. What's interesting is a week ago, we were thinking that maybe by the middle of July, we'll have something to track out here, but now it looks like that has been postponed. So it looks like now late July, we're thinking things should finally wake up as the MJO becomes a little bit more coherent out here in the central portion of Africa. While there is sinking air out here across say the western portion of the MDR, you'll see that here. I do see an uptick in tropical activity in the latter part of July into early August. Of course, our Canadian model really not showing anything very far, anything big out there in the next 10 days. And again, all the way through July 17th, other than, again, we do see these tropical waves, and that's due to the fact that the air out here is too darn dry. If we look at our water vapor imagery, all this brown is very dry air, and then the turquoise is a lot of moisture in the atmosphere. So if we play this through, you can just see just way, way, way too dry and stable out here. And that continues all the way through the 23rd of July. Look at all this brown here. I mean, gosh, your intertropical convergence zone is way down here, very far south than it should be for this time of the year. It should be a little bit further north than that. So it is quite interesting to see a huge change. Last year, our ITCZ was like way up here at this time. Now it is way further south. So definitely a difference from just 365 days ago. That on top of lots of vertical deep layer wind shear that is coming back into the forecast here. According to our GFS model, you can see this red ribbon here indicating a lot of deep layer vertical wind shear. Very El Nino-like, to say the least, actually, where we have very little wind shear over here in the Eastern Pacific, but we have been having a lot of deep layer vertical wind shear problems out here in the Caribbean as well as the main development region. And this is why this basin has been closed for business all the way through pretty much the middle of July. Excuse me there, did not want to cough. And therefore, I just don't see much in the way of development out here in the MDR, at least through the middle of July, perhaps towards the very end of July, we'll see things wake up. So now that we talked about the deep tropics on our global computer models, let's take a look now at those trade winds. Are we going to see any stronger than normal trade winds or any westerly wind anomalies out there? So this is the 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. So anything in blue here basically denotes stronger than normal trade winds, okay? And then the red and orange colors denote weaker than normal trade winds, and you get westerly wind anomalies. So you're looking at two different colors here, or different shades, I should say. So this is July 7th, and this is down in time. So time increases the further down you go. And we can see right in this area of the Atlantic, we are looking at overall much weaker trade winds than what we had up here, which resulted in a lot of sea surface temperature cooling in the deep tropics. But as we go forward here, you can see a lot of weakening of our trade winds, especially across the central MDR region. And this is what's needed to warm up sea surface temperatures, where we don't have a lot of mixing in the oceans to cool off that, okay, or a lot of wind to mix up the oceans to cool off the water. But out here in the Pacific side of things, boy, oh boy, these trade winds are very, very strong for sure. I mean, way stronger than they should be here in purple. Man, that is quite significant, anywhere between 20 to 25 knots stronger than it should be for this. Actually, no, more like 15 to 25 knots. That's about right. Stronger than it should be. And that's really, really going to help cool off the sea surface temperatures out there in the Eastern Pacific. And we might see a quick resurgence of La Nina, all thanks to that. And speaking of a Hofmolar diagram, here's a look at the European Ensemble Prediction Control 200 millibar velocity potential anomaly. So this is telling us where there is sinking motion in the atmosphere across the tropics and where there's going to be rising motion where it's favorable for tropical cyclone Genius. Now, as we go into late July into August, the sinking motion really doesn't matter a whole lot as it does in the preseason of tropical activity, usually like in June or July. That's because of how our atmosphere behaves, you know? And so as we go into latter part of July, while there is all this sinking motion, okay, there is going to be another convective coupled Kelvin wave that moves across the region in the latter part of July. Now, fortunately, there is some early indications here. There will be enough deep layer vertical wind shear and enough drier air that not much activity is expected through at least the 21st of July. But that doesn't mean that's going to stay that way, because there is a lot of rising motion here in the Atlantic and even in the Eastern Pacific, and that is bear watching. Now, when we go forward out in time here, looking beyond the 21st of July, which is right here, again, this is a Hofmolar diagram. Okay, this is a stretched out image looking at the entire equator from 0 degrees west or east in longitude all the way back into the same region. All right. And so there is your rising motion. This doesn't show up very well on this diagram because it's, the time frames are more spaced, but here's a convective coupled Kelvin wave. Here's another attempt at one. Here's a much stronger signal of a convective coupled Kelvin wave. Possibly it looks like the MJO is going to kind of favor this area. But look at this. What happens here by very early August, look at over Africa. And Ben Knoll, that studies the tropics very well, has been talking a lot about this, how the West African monsoon season is going to wake up in a big way. We're probably going to see a West African monsoonal outbreak of lots of tropical waves, lots of heavy rainfall in this area as we go into early August. And that's when the show gets started, folks, out here during Cabo Verde season. All right, because right now it's closed. Might wake up a little bit, and then it really wakes up in a big way. Now, even so, there's a lot of sinking motion here over the MDR. Please don't wrap your head around that and be like, oh, it's going to be super unfavorable, David, into early and middle August, because we know climatology very well. By the middle of August, we start really looking closely at the tropics really waking up, all because of this upward motion, and this is going to be timed very well. In fact, when the MJO is in phases 1, 2, and 3, so that is over Central Eastern Africa into the Indian Ocean, this favors the Atlantic the most with tropical genesis. So we really, really got to watch on how this trends in future model runs on the European ensemble, because this is quite a bit of upward motion, lots of energy to be released, and boy, lots of warm sea surface temperatures out here. That is why I think we're going to have a pretty active Cabo Verde season towards the middle and the end of August, but even beginning even sooner than that. Now, of course, when we see how warm the Gulf has really warmed up over the last 3 to 4 days here, this is pretty concerning. Now, I'm not trying to fearmonger or cause panic here. I'm not saying that the Gulf is a harbinger, a machine for tropical storms or hurricanes to develop within. But if we get a very favorable background state and we get a tropical wave that sneaks under the radar, like we saw with Chantel, right? That came off of a front and yet it became a 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm. We got to be careful with these little waves that develop, right? Because if they form underneath very divergent flow aloft, that means the air is moving upward. There's a lot of moisture. There's a lot of upper ocean heat content here being stored in the Gulf or in the Caribbean. These things could pop fast, okay? And that is why sea surface temperatures alone do not develop tropical storms or hurricanes. But if the background state is favorable and you get a system that tracks like this or kind of hangs out and kind of meanders and goes like that, like we saw with Milton, not saying that Milton did this, but systems that spend a lot of time out here as weak disturbances, they could wake up very quickly, develop very quickly, like we saw with Milton. And I mean, we never saw, or I did not even see Milton becoming a Cat 5, but yet it did because of the background state and where our sea surface temperatures were. So that is why we really got to watch how warm this basin gets in the Gulf as well as the northwestern Caribbean and even across the western Atlantic, because yeah, water temperatures here off of Louisiana now are creeping close to 32 degrees Celsius. That is very close to 90 degrees in Fahrenheit. In fact, water temperatures here are above average in the Gulf, and they have cooled substantially over the northeastern Gulf. But with the weakening trade winds, the lack of deep convection, lots of incoming solar radiation, we're going to re-warm those waters again to well above average, I'm sure, including for the southwestern Gulf. Doesn't surprise me. The Gulf cools fast and it warms fast too. Now, looking at our upper ocean heat content here, as far as it goes, yeah, the Gulf still looking at a lot of upper ocean heat content, enough to support intense, violent hurricanes, including for the Caribbean. The southwestern Atlantic is open for business with enough upper ocean heat content to support a strong hurricane if the background state cooperates. That's the thing that's really inhibiting any development. Dry air, it's sinking and it's warm. We're not going to get anything despite the very warm sea surface temperatures. That is the problem. Once we remove the cap, once we get the background state to cooperate, it could be a doozy. It really can. And I sure hope it doesn't become that way, because if it does, yeah, I could only imagine on how much damage we could see this hurricane season. So that is why we have to be prepared. Even so it's sleeping under the radar, well, kind of is, kind of isn't. We had Chantel, which is the third named storm of the hurricane season, we are running ahead of schedule. All right, we are. So looking at the anomalies here of upper ocean heat content, they are below average, but with weakening trade winds, that is going to change very quickly. The subtropics here of the Atlantic across Bermuda running ahead of schedule with upper ocean heat content. That's important because that gives us an idea that we may not see any development out here. We could see it over here. We might see it over here, or even over here. We could see these systems kind of drift and go like that. Remember Sandy? Look at Sandy, where it tracked. We cannot just focus on what goes on out here, because things could sneak under the radar much closer to home. And I think that's probably what we're going to favor this hurricane season. So now, with that being said, let's take a look now at our sea surface temperature anomalies across much of the Atlantic, the Gulf, the deep tropics, the MDR region, as well as the Eastern Pacific, and even off of California, because this is a signal that I look for. All right. First of all, the Atlantic as a whole is a whole lot warmer than what we're seeing out there in the Eastern Pacific. I mean, golly word. Look at these anomalies over here near Bermuda. Anywhere between 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above the long-term average, okay? So when you look at a normal, say for an example, it's 27 or 26 Celsius, well, the waters out here are about 29 Celsius, so they are 3 degrees warmer than they should be for this time of the year. That doesn't seem like a whole lot, but that is very significant, and it could reshape on how this hurricane season behaves. Look at the MDR down here. Really has warmed up pretty quickly over the last 3 to 5 days, thanks to what word am I looking for? The redundancy. That's a tongue twister word. I just kind of spit it out here. Just really warm. Water temperatures have really recovered here, and they're going to continue because the trade winds are going to remain weak for the next week or two, including for the Caribbean and the Gulf. So this whole basin is going to be seeing a lot more orange, maybe even some red colors eventually. We got to really pay attention to that because, yep, we have all the way until the latter part of August before the warming kind of plateaus. The PMM off of California is also very negative. That's a big signal for a busy season for the Atlantic because you can think about it as a whole. This basin is seen on an overall average below average sea surface temperatures. And with the trade winds that are picking up here, this is all going to cool off, I believe, in the next week or two. And so lots of below average anomalies over here, above average over here. There's definitely a signal that really begs for a busy season, especially once we go into August, September, and October, which are traditionally our busiest months in the tropics, in the Atlantic side of things. When we look at our sea surface temperature difference over the last 7 days, you can see any yellows and oranges here denote that sea surface temperature warmth has resumed, especially off of Africa. Look at all of this red here. Those are water temperatures that have warmed anywhere between 1 degree to 2 degrees, even some areas 3 degrees warmer than it was just 7 days ago. That is pretty remarkable, to say the least, and that's because, again, lack of Saharan dust, lack of trade winds out here, and this whole area, I believe, is going to warm up even further over the next 2 to 3 weeks. As long as the trade winds remain weak, that's what we're going to see. Water temperatures here have cooled off a little bit thanks to Chantal and lots of deep convection, but water temperatures over here are going to likely recover as we go into the middle to the end of July. And that leads me into this graphic that I drew up here, okay? I hope you guys really like it very much. Let me move my image out of the way here so you all don't get too distracted. So we can see here, as of July the 7th, this is basically what I made with the arrows, the numbers and stuff. That is what I made, but NHC did the rest. So a big round of applause goes to the National Hurricane Center. So you can see on this particular day from 1944 to 2020, on the 7th of July, there have been only 13 named storms, 4 hurricanes, meaning this is a very inactive part of the hurricane season. Now, we saw Chantal, which is, kind of typical for early July development, So that's not unusual. We kind of plateau, though, right here throughout the rest of July, and then we kind of perk it up a little bit more into early August. That's why I think in early August, the chances of us seeing a named storm and even maybe a hurricane is a little higher. But it's usually not until we get past the 15th, the 20th of August. Basically, Bill Gray would say that's the ringing of the bell when the tropics really wake up in a hardship way. And that usually happens on the 20th of August. And as we go into early September, that's when the peak of the hurricane season arrives, all right? Now, you guys could come to me or post it on X that, well, we're not seeing any tropical development. Where are the tropical cyclones at on the 1st of September? I understand where you're coming from, but, saying that, oh, the tropics are so dead right now, this is unusual. It's not unusual. This is very normal. Even during very busy, perhaps hyperactive seasons, we can see a very inactive early, mid, and late July. Well, with that being said, I sure hope you found this video on the tropics very helpful, detailed, and informative. If you did, and if you're new, please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel because we are going to go live within 24 hours before a tropical storm, major hurricane makes landfall anywhere in the United States. So again, if you have not subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so. This is your opportunity to get latest tropical updates here on the YouTube channel. Give that like a huge thumbs up, a nudge, and also please leave a comment in the section below this video. And also, I think that's really about it. Just check out my merchandise if you can also. But otherwise, thank you all for watching today's tropical weather outlook and discussion for Monday, July 7th, 2025. I'll see you back here more tomorrow.